What major conflict in the 60s created a rift between young people and those who had lived through the Second World War? The Vietnam War. What was a common way for students to cool down in schools in the hot, humid South without air conditioning? Just opening classroom windows. How are students typically disciplined in the 60s? Swift physical discipline. Which of the following was allowed on high school campuses in the 1960s? Rifles on gun racks. Which item was commonly carried by boys and not considered a weapon in the 1960s? Pocket knives. What type of clothing did girls typically wear to school in the 60s? Miniskirts and go-go boots. How did most students in the 60s get to school? Walking or biking? What was a common social practice during high school dates in the 60s? Driving out into the country. What was a common way for high school students to get their news in the 60s? Newspapers and TV broadcasts. What was a factor that made life hard for students and their families? Single-parent households. What was a common lunchtime activity for students in the 60s? Socializing in the cafeteria or schoolyard. What was a common feature of male coaches' disciplinary tools in the schools during the 60s? Paddles with holes. Which hairstyle was popular among girls in the 60s? The beehive. What was a typical punishment method used in Catholic schools during the 60s? Smacking with rulers. What was a common practice for students after school to help their parents? Doing chores. What was a significant extracurricular activity that shaped social life in high schools, especially in rural areas? Football. How did students typically get to school in urban areas like the Bronx? By walking. What type of music and associated lifestyle was becoming popular among high school students? Rock and roll and hippie movement. What was a typical dress code requirement for boys in high schools during the early 1960s? Sport coats and ties. How did many high school students in the 60s respond to the Vietnam War? By protesting and participating in anti-war movements. What was another common extracurricular activity that helped shape social life in 1960s high schools? School band. How did students typically address their teachers in the 1960s? By last name and with a title. What was a popular way for students to spend their weekends? Attending drive-in movies. What was a popular extracurricular activity for girls in high schools during the 60s? Home economics. What was a common way for students to communicate with each other during school hours? Passing notes. What was a popular fashion accessory for girls in high schools? Headbands. What type of music was often played at high school dances? Rock and roll. Which civil rights event had a significant impact on students' lives during the 60s? The March on Washington. What type of classroom technology was most commonly used? Overhead projectors. How did students often spend their summer vacations? Working summer jobs or on family farms. What was a typical school lunch like in the 60s? Cafeteria food with items like meatloaf and mashed potatoes. What type of physical education activities were common in 1960s high schools? Traditional team sports like basketball and baseball. What was a popular trend among high school students regarding their cars? Customizing with unique paint jobs. Which television show that premiered in the 60s became a significant part of teenage culture? The Brady Bunch. What was a common form of protest among high school students during the 60s? Sit-ins and walkouts. Thanks for joining. Like and subscribe for more trivia and share your score below. See you next time.